Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. We're taking a look at the future of work, specifically through the lens of some subcultures.
And we'll use the culture mapping methodology, as always, to kind of chart these subcultures, combined with the Voros cone of possibilities.
Right, so we're talking about makers, digital nomads, biohackers, and hikikomori.
And these subcultures, I think, highlight the growing tension we're seeing in work due to things like automation, virtualization, and artificial intelligence.
And through all of that is this idea of cognitive load.
Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit about why that's so crucial when we're talking about the future of work?
Yeah. What our research suggests is that as work becomes more automated and more driven by technology, the cognitive demands on individuals will actually increase.
That's really interesting. So before we get into these individual subcultures, maybe we can just define cognitive load.
Yeah, so cognitive load, think of your working memory as like RAM in a computer. It's a finite resource. And so as we're bombarded with more information, more devices, more complex tasks, that RAM fills up, and then we start to experience things like mental fatigue, decreased productivity, and potentially even burnout.
Right, and it's not necessarily about just working harder, but it's working differently.
Exactly, exactly. The nature of work itself is changing, and so these subcultures illustrate potential adaptations to those changes. Culture mapping allows us to look at them not as isolated trends, but as, indicators of larger societal shifts.
So we're not just looking at digital nomadism as a fad, but as a potential response to this tension.
Precisely, yeah. And this is where the Voros cone of possibilities becomes so valuable because it allows us to place these subcultures within those categories of, projected, probable, possible, wild card.
Mm.
And so we can start to really understand their likelihood and their potential impact.
So let's start unpacking that with our first sort of projected future, which is hybrid collaborative workspaces. And I think the subculture we're looking at there is maker culture. What are the defining characteristics there, and where does this fit into the Voros cone?
So makers, really focus on hands-on project-based work, and it often blends, traditional craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. So think like high-tech workshops, you've got your 3D printers, laser cutters, alongside traditional woodworking tools.
So this really interesting blend of the old and the new. Where will we put this on the Voros cone?
I would say maker culture is definitely in the projected and even probable future. I mean, we're already seeing this trend emerge, driven by, the maker movement itself, the increasing accessibility of technology, and I think this growing desire for more tangible and purpose-driven work.
And in terms of cognitive load, what are we looking at with makers?
It's high, but it's high in a specific way, right? So they're constantly having to learn new technologies, troubleshoot technical issues, manage complex projects. It's a very hands-on problem-solving type of environment.
So designing for that future means thinking about more than just cool gadgets and tools.
Absolutely, yeah. It's about understanding the cognitive demands of this type of work and then creating spaces and tools that support both creativity and cognitive well-being.
That makes a lot of sense. Now let's move from the workshop to, say, a beachside cafe in Bali, because we're going to talk about decentralized work networks with a focus on digital nomads. Where does this fit into the Voros cone?
Yeah, digital nomads are definitely in the projected category, and depending on, how certain trends evolve, I think they could very easily move into probable. So, leveraging technology to work remotely, often prioritizing location independence, flexibility.
And I think when people think about working from anywhere, it does sound idyllic, but what are some of the downsides, particularly when we're thinking about cognitive load?
Yeah, I mean, the constant juggling act of time zones, having to adapt to new cultural environments, maintaining some semblance of work-life balance when your backdrop is constantly shifting, it takes a toll.
It's like having to build a stable desk on a moving train.
Exactly, exactly. And then, you add to that the ever-present distractions of a highly stimulating environment and the potential for social isolation. And, it can be a recipe for cognitive overload.
And I think this is where we see that designers need to start thinking beyond just ergonomics and user interfaces.
Mhm.
How do we anticipate these psychological and even sociological impacts of the technologies and the work models that we're creating?
Yeah, you're hitting on a really critical point. I mean, think of the baseline test scene in Blade Runner 2049. Fictional, of course, but it highlights this importance of understanding the human response, both emotional and cognitive, to advanced technology. Designers have to consider these abstract yet vital aspects of the human experience.
So in a way, Designers are almost becoming cognitive psychologists, trying to anticipate how these future work environments are going to impact our mind.
Exactly, exactly. And that's actually where we'll delve deeper in the next part of our deep dive as we explore the more radical possibilities of radical personalization and retreat. Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing our exploration of the future of work using culture mapping and the Voros cone, with a real focus today on how these emerging subcultures really showcase that tension that's growing between technology and our own cognitive capacities.
Yeah, and speaking of tension, I think our last two subcultures really ramp it up as we move a little bit further into the realm of possible and wild card futures with radical personalization and retreat.
Right, and here we have the biohackers and the hikikomori, and at first glance, they seem like polar opposites, but I think they both illustrate how technology can be used to really radically reshape our relationship to work and lifestyle in general.
Let's start with the biohackers. Where do they fit in on the Voros cone, and what are some of their defining characteristics?
Yeah, so I would say we're putting biohackers kind of in the possible future, maybe even edging into wild card a little bit. But they represent this future where personalized health optimization driven by technology becomes absolutely central to both work and life.
So not just Fitbits, we're talking about something much more intense.
Exactly, yeah. Things like, genetic modification, biofeedback systems, real-time data monitoring of everything from your sleep cycles to your cognitive performance, all in this pursuit of maximizing human potential.
So it's almost like we become these high-performance athletes, constantly striving for that peak mental and physical state. But in that constant optimization, what is that doing to our cognitive load?
Right, so it creates this very unique set of cognitive demands because now you're constantly having to analyze data, tweak variables, essentially make decisions about your own biology, your own cognition.
That's a lot of pressure. You're essentially managing your own evolution,
Mhm.
which sounds exhilarating but also exhausting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it highlights a really important design challenge for this future, which is how do you make these complex technologies, these complex data sets, understandable and manageable for the average person?
Because if you're spending all your time and energy trying to, interpret your genetic code or figure out how to optimize your sleep cycles, you're not actually getting any work done.
Exactly. So design in this context becomes about more than just, usability. It becomes about cognitive accessibility, ensuring that people can actually understand and utilize these powerful tools without being overwhelmed by them.
Right. So it's fascinating how even in a future that's seemingly about maximizing our potential, our cognitive capacity is still the bottleneck.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why understanding cognitive load is so essential no matter how far technology advances.
Right. And speaking of which, let's move from the optimization-obsessed biohackers to the hikikomori, which represents almost a complete retreat from that kind of technologically driven lifestyle. Where would we put them on the Voros cone?
Yeah, so hikikomori, while they're already an emerging trend, in some parts of the world, I think in terms of the Voroscome, we're really talking about wild card here. Um, they represent this scenario where individuals, often driven by social anxieties or just the pressures of modern life, choose to essentially withdraw from the physical world and exist primarily in digital spaces.
So it's a stark contrast to the hyper-optimized world of the biohackers. But even in that digital retreat, are there still cognitive demands that are placed on us?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Even though they're retreating from the physical world, they're not escaping the demands of modern life. They still need to work, they need to socialize, manage their mental well-being, but they're doing it all through the lens of technology.
So it's not so much about escaping technology, but it's about creating a different kind of relationship with it, one that feels maybe safer, more controlled.
Exactly. And that actually brings up some really interesting design questions, right? Like how do you create these digital environments that foster a sense of community, a sense of belonging for individuals who are intentionally isolating themselves? How do you design for mental well-being in a world where technology is often seen as a source of anxiety and distraction?
It seems like such a paradox to design for connection, but within the context of isolation.
It is. It's a real paradox. But, these kinds of paradoxes, I think, are exactly what designers are going to have to grapple with as we move further into the 21st century. These lines between the physical and the digital, between work and leisure, between connection and isolation, they're all becoming increasingly blurred.
And to navigate those blurred lines, we need a much more nuanced and sophisticated understanding of human psychology, of our needs, our motivations, our limitations, our potentials.
Exactly. It's not enough to just design functional products or even beautiful products anymore. We have to design for the whole person, considering their emotional, social, even spiritual well-being.
That's a tall order. But as we've seen with these subcultures, the stakes are very, very high because the future of work isn't just about efficiency or productivity. It's about creating a world where technology actually serves humanity, not the other way around.
Absolutely. And that's where design, informed by culture mapping, the Voris cone, and this deep understanding of cognitive load, can really play this pivotal role. And that's something we're going to explore further in the final part of our deep dive.
We've traveled from high-tech workshops to digital retreats and really explored how these emerging subcultures are pushing the boundaries of how we think about work.
And throughout it all, we see this concept of cognitive load acting as this kind of almost invisible force that shapes the viability of these different futures.
And designers have such a crucial role to play in this.
Oh.
What are some key takeaways for designers who are thinking about the future of work, especially as it relates to these rising cognitive demands that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think the first and maybe the most crucial is to embrace a new level of abstraction in their thinking. For too long, design has really focused on the concrete, build a better chair, code a sleeker app.
Tangible solutions for tangible problems.
Exactly. But as we've seen with these subcultures, the challenges of the future are just as much psychological and sociological as they are technological.
So it's less about designing things and more about designing systems, experiences.
Exactly. Yeah. Designers need to become systems thinkers. They need to be able to consider this complex interplay of technology, of human behavior, and the environment. They need to be thinking about the second and third order effects, not just the immediate problem that they're trying to solve.
And can you give an example of what that looks like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, think back to that baseline test in Blade Runner 2049, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just about whether or not the replicant could solve a puzzle or recall a memory. It was about gauging their emotional response, their capacity for empathy, their essentially human qualities.
And that's kind of what designers need to be doing now, right? Designing for the human experience, not just for functionality.
Exactly, exactly. You could design, for example, the most perfectly ergonomic portable workstation for a digital nomad. But if you're not accounting for their potential isolation, the constant distractions, the unique cognitive challenges of that lifestyle, your design's ultimately going to fail.
So how do you design for those more, I guess, abstract aspects?
Yeah.
How do you quantify a sense of belonging or cognitive well-being?
Yeah, it requires a real shift in perspective, right? Designers need to move beyond these traditional metrics of efficiency and productivity and really embrace more qualitative, human-centered approaches. So this might mean things like conducting ethnographic research, really understanding user motivations. It might even mean incorporating insights from fields like psychology and sociology.
So it sounds like the role of the designer is really expanding, becoming much more interdisciplinary.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good thing because as we've seen, the challenges of this future of work, they're complex, they're interconnected, and they demand creative, holistic solutions that consider the whole person, not just the user or the consumer.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what is the key message that you really want to leave our listeners with as they're thinking about their own futures of work?
I think it's this. The future of work is not something that's being done to us. It's something that we are all creating collectively, day by day, choice by choice. So be mindful of the tools that you use, the environments that you inhabit, the potential impact of those things on your own cognitive resources.
Mhm.
Advocate for designs that prioritize well-being and balance, not just efficiency and productivity.
Because ultimately, it is about thriving in this new world of work, not just surviving. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the future of work.